Hey there, I'm Ari from the Tech Buyers Guru, and I'm very excited to be bringing you a review of the latest Ryzen processors from AMD. I have 4 processors here on the table, and I'll start on my right side. This is the AMD Ryzen 3 3200G. Then I have the Ryzen 5 3400G. On this side I have the Ryzen 5 3600 and Ryzen 5 3600X. There's a lot of numbers, a lot of Ryzens in there. What does it all mean? Well, these processors on this side are actually what AMD refers to as APUs. The rest of us can just call them CPUs with built-in graphics. They have Vega 8 and Vega 11 graphics built in respectively. Now that's the same graphics unit that debuted last year in the 2200 and 2400G. The difference here is that AMD's been able to finesse the clock rates, and so they're about 10 or 15% faster than in 2018. On this side we have what AMD refers to as CPUs. They have no built-in graphics. These are actually 6-core CPUs versus the 4 cores over here. So you drop the onboard graphics, you pick up a couple of cores, and yes, they are a little bit more expensive as well. The price ranges range from $100, $150, $200, and $250. So it's pretty symmetric. That's pretty nice. But what are the differences, and what does all that money buy you in terms of performance? Well, you'll be learning in this review. Now, one key consideration is that when you jump from the G series to the non-G series, you actually get a new architecture. The 3200G and 3400G are built on the Zen Plus architecture using the 12 nanometer manufacturing process. The 3600 series is built on the Zen 2 architecture using the 7 nanometer manufacturing process. What does that mean? The 3600 series CPUs are actually quite a bit more advanced. They're cooler, more efficient, they can clock up higher, and they've actually got higher instructions per clock cycle than the Zen Plus or original Zen CPUs released in 2017. Zen 2 is really what we've been waiting for, and so I'm excited to have Zen 2 here. Zen Plus is still a great option. It's a budget option, and so we'll see what's the difference in terms of the performance. Of course, these are 4-core processors and these are 6-core processors, so that also sets them apart. But I'll do some single-core testing to see what Zen Plus versus Zen 2 means to you. Now, I also have some motherboards on the table. The reason I have these is to mention that I'll be using last generation motherboards. These are from 2018. I've got a B450i Aorus from Gigabyte. That's an ITX motherboard. And I've got an Asus ROG Crosshair 7 Hero Wi-Fi. This was pretty much the best motherboard released in 2018. And I'm excited to be using both of these. And the reason is because the ITX motherboard has built-in graphics outputs, which you need to test these G-series processors. The high-end motherboards in the AM4 lineup actually don't often have graphics outputs because most AMD CPUs don't have onboard graphics. So they save money and they throw in some other ports like additional USB ports. So I cannot test an APU on this motherboard. But because it has a better power delivery system and potentially will support better overclocking, I'm going to be using that for the 3600 processors. The other thing you should know about using these motherboards from 2018 is that they need to be flashed with the latest firmware, which means you need an older CPU on hand to do it. I actually have a Ryzen 7 2700X, which I flashed both of these motherboards with already, but I'm mentioning this so you keep in mind you can't just go out and buy an older motherboard simply because it's on sale, you get a great discount, or someone gave it to you, or you buy it used, for instance. You actually have to have an older CPU to flash these motherboards. So I have that older CPU, I flashed them, but please don't take this as an endorsement or a message that, hey, go out and buy the oldest motherboard you can just because the socket's the same. The other thing I'm going to mention, of course, is that I have to throw in some competition into this review to know how AMD is doing. I've got 2 CPUs that will offer some pretty stiff competition. First, a classic Skylake CPU. This was released in 2015. It is the Core i7-6700K. It is still the architecture that Intel is using in its brand new, or the latest, I should say, Core i9-9900K. The only real difference between these 2 CPUs is this has twice as many cores. It's also refined a little bit, so it can clock up a little bit higher than the 6700K, which is pretty much maxed out at 4.5 gigahertz. This can go to 5 gigahertz, but the architecture is exactly the same. Don't let Intel tell you otherwise. So This is a 4-core, 8-thread processor. It's going to be really interesting to see in particular how the 3400G from AMD stacks up against this, because it's also a 4-core, 8-thread processor. We know its VIGA graphics is going to be much, much faster, but how about the CPU itself based on that Zen Plus architecture? It'll be a really interesting showdown. Of course, the Core i9 is a much more expensive CPU. I'm actually not going to include it in the CPU benchmarks. I'm more interested in whether or not the graphics have increased, and the graphics capabilities have increased from 2015 to 2019. My hunch is that they have not. So, without further ado, I'm going to crack open the boxes, show you what you get with these 4 CPUs, and then get into my benchmarks. All right, we've got our 4 processors here. I'm going to pop them open and show you what you get inside. I'll start with the 3200G. Okay, CPU's right there. You get a Ryzen 3 sticker, a box sticker, and then you have a cardboard box with a cooler in it. This is the Wraith Stealth cooler. Has thermal paste pre-applied. And I'm just going to show you what the height of this is. Comes out to about 56 millimeters. About 56 millimeters right there. Okay, so that's quite a bit bigger than the stock Intel cooler. And that does mean it'll fit in most cases, but some cases are not big enough for this cooler. So the stock Intel cooler is 47 millimeters. So this is about 9 millimeters taller. Let's take a look at what we get with the 3400G. We got our processor, 3400G. And then we have a much bigger cooler. So let's take a look at that. This is called the Spire as opposed to the Stealth. All right, we've got our 2 coolers next to each other. You can see that the main difference is that the heatsink is just quite a bit taller. All right, the fan is actually, looks to be the same. There are no LEDs on this, no RGB lighting. Let's take a look at the height. Comes out to about 72 millimeters. So that's about 16 millimeters taller than what you get with the 3200G, and it actually makes a pretty big difference. This cooler won't fit in as many cases. A lot of low profile cases simply won't take this. Some low profile cases won't even take this one, a lot of the small form factor cases. But if you're intending to use this as a home theater PC CPU, this cooler is probably going to be too big for just about every case. All right, it's time to move forward with the benchmarking of these 4 chips. We're going to start with the 3200G and 3400G.